I've never liked name tags, especially the kind that peel off with a static cling and stick right over your heart like a dare. But that night at the Wexford Foundation's annual gala, mine said Abigail Dalton, hospitality, not Mrs. Dalton, not founder's daughter-in-law. Not even guest, just hospitality. Like I was one of the caterers. Like I didn't belong. The ballroom sparkled with gold-rimmed glasses and navy linen. The kind of place where people measured each other by last names and who they were sitting beside. And me, I was the one people handed their empty champagne flutes to. I stood near the back staircase for most of the night, my hands folded in front of me, watching the crowd ebb and swirl under chandeliers that cost more than my first year of grad school. It wasn't supposed to be this way. But when Evelyn, my mother-in-law, swept past me earlier that evening with her usual peppermint snap voice and said, "Abigail, would you be a dear and help the staff tonight? You always did have such a servant's heart," I heard what a sumza. She really meant stay out of the way. So I did, like I always had. Just before 7, the room filled in. Tuxedos, sequined shawls, the faint scent of moneyed confidence. People kissed the air beside each other's cheeks and laughed too hard at things no one would remember by morning. And somewhere in that glittering crowd was the family I'd married into 10 years ago. The Daltons. Old money from Maine, if you asked Evelyn. New pressure on everyone around them, if you asked me. I spotted Camille first, my sister-in-law in navy satin, swirling her wine already halfway through her second glass. She didn't see me, or maybe she did, and looked past me. That was her gift, making people feel invisible without ever being cruel. Next was Richard, my father-in-law, smiling stiffly for a donor photo, his eyes glassy. Evelyn stood near the entrance like a hostess in a mansion that wasn't hers but felt like it should be. And Noah was late. He always was, but tonight, I needed him to be early. Because tonight I didn't have the strength to hold my smile on my own. Someone brushed my elbow. A waitress. Younger than me, lip gloss shining. "Are you Abigail?" Evelyn said you'd help pass the truffle risotto spoons. I nodded, even though the tray in her hand smelled like someone else's life. She handed it off to me, and I became what Evelyn had quietly wished all along. The help. I moved through the crowd, tray balanced, offering tiny ceramic spoons of $60 per plate appetizers to people who wouldn't remember my face. And then I heard it. A voicemail, warm, amused, somewhere over my shoulder. "She even dressed the part this year. Isn't that darling?" I didn't need to turn. I knew the voice. It was Evelyn's nephew, Jeremy. The one who called me Abby even after I'd corrected him a dozen times. The one who'd once joked at Thanksgiving that I married up. Another voice chimed in, female, breathy, with false sweetness. "Wait, is that her?" I thought she was like one of the caterers' laughter. Short, brittle. My throat tightened, but I kept moving. I placed a spoon gently on a cocktail napkin beside someone's drink. My hands didn't shake, but inside something shriveled just a little more. I'd always known I wasn't one of them. But tonight they didn't even try to pretend. I retreated toward the side alcove where the service staff gathered. I told myself I'd just take a moment, fix my name tag, maybe wipe my hands. But instead, I stood behind a velvet curtain and stared at my reflection in a framed mirror, gold trim antique. My makeup was still perfect. Hair pinned up in soft waves like Evelyn liked. Dress floor-length black crepe, elegant, safe. But none of it mattered. Not when the people who were supposed to love me, the people who raised the man I married, looked at me and saw someone disposable. I heard the MC take the mic. A low hum, a clink of glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to welcome this evening's co-chair, Evelyn Dalton." Applause. I didn't go out. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed behind the curtain, back pressed against the cold wall, breathing slowly as if each breath might glue me back together. I don't know how long I stood there, but the air changed. A hush, then a flutter of conversation. Heels clicked, champagne fizzed, and then I heard it. A voice that always found me in a room. Low. Warm. Steady. "Where's my wife, Noah? He was here." I stepped out just in time to see him sweep past the coat check, handsome as ever in midnight blue hair still damp from the drizzle outside. People turned. Smiled. clapped him on the shoulder, but he didn't stop. He moved straight toward me. And when he reached me without a pause, without a question, he took the tray from my hand, set it aside, and pulled me in. "Kiss me," he whispered. And I did. In front of them all. For 1 second, the ballroom stilled. Evelyn's face froze mid-speech. Jeremy choked on his wine. Noah looked straight at his family and said, "Abigail is my wife. Not staff, not decoration, not someone you get to treat like background noise." A pause. Then he smiled, cool, controlled. "Let's remember who this gala honors, shall we? My grandfather. A man who built his legacy on dignity. Let's act like we deserve to carry that forward." The room shifted. Just slightly. Like a ship tilting toward wind. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt seen. I wasn't a tag. I wasn't a placeholder. I was Noah's wife. And they were on notice. Noah didn't say anything until we reached the guest wing. He held my hand the whole way gently, like it wasn't just fingers he was holding but the parts of me that were slipping through the cracks all evening. The door clicked shut behind us, muffling the music and clinking glassware from the ballroom. Inside, the old house was quiet in a way. Only these coastal estates can be like. Time didn't move unless someone gave it permission. I leaned against the window frame, arms crossed. "Thank you," I said. He sat on the edge of the love seat, undoing the top button of his collar. "For what?" "For noticing." His eyes met mine, soft but tired. "Abs, I always notice." I almost believed him. He stood and crossed the room in 2 steps. "I shouldn't have let her rope you into helping. That was low." I gave a small shrug. It wasn't the first time. His jaw tensed. "I'll talk to her," he said. I shook my head. "Number don't. It'll only make things worse." He reached for my hands again. "You don't have to keep proving you're good enough for them. You're already good enough for me." And yet, that was never the problem. I never married him to impress his family. I married him because once upon a time Noah looked at me like I was the most interesting sentence in a room full of recycled conversation. But lately that look had been fading, smothered by emails, investor calls, whispered arguments between Camille and Evelyn in the kitchen that always stopped when I entered. I walked toward the guest room mirror, the oval one above the antique console that still smelled faintly of cedar and some perfume Evelyn favored. In the reflection, I saw us, Noah in black tie, sleeves pushed to his elbows. Me, makeup perfect but expression not. I looked like a woman trying very hard to seem like she still belonged. He stepped behind me. Our eyes met in the mirror. "I know tonight was awful," he said softly, "but I meant what I said out there. I'll start drawing lines with them." I nodded, but something in my stomach knotted tighter. Because there was something he didn't know. Something I hadn't told him yet, and it wasn't about Evelyn or Camille or their quiet clipped judgment. It was about me. And what I'd found. Last week. In his office drawer. I'd meant to look for a stamp. Instead, I found a receipt. The paper wasn't folded. It just lay there, half-tucked beneath a pile of conference brochures in his desk drawer. As if it didn't matter. As if I wouldn't see it. But I did. It was a hotel receipt. A boutique place in Sausalito where the rooms had no numbers, only names like Willow Brine Mariner's Watch. He had stayed in sea glass. I remember because it was printed at the top, elegant font on thick cream cardstock. Along with 2 breakfasts. 2 glasses of wine. 1 in-room massage. And checkout signed. Noah Harwood. The date was 3 weeks ago. Right when he'd said he was flying to Denver for the wearable tech panel. I had stared at it for minutes, heart thudding, hands cold. I told myself it could be work-related. A meeting. A mix-up. But even in my silence, my body already knew better. That evening, I had made him his favorite grilled trout, lemon butter, rosemary, new potatoes, and watched his face as he told me about the keynote speaker who'd fumbled her mic. He never mentioned the ocean, or the wine. I didn't confront him. Not then. Not yet. Because I wasn't ready to hear it. I folded the receipt and slipped it inside the back cover of my planner behind the sticky notes and grocery lists and scribbles from weeks that felt too long. That was 5 days ago. Now standing in front of the mirror beside him, I could feel it pressing like a bruise from inside my bag. He still didn't know I'd seen it. "Do you trust me?" he asked. The question landed between us unexpected. I cleared my throat. "That depends. Are you about to ask me to lend you my car or hide a body?" He gave a soft laugh. "Neither. I just meant sometimes I get the sense you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Even when things are fine." Fine. Funny word. It's the word you use when your voice shakes, but you don't want to explain. The word you use when someone asks if you're okay in the middle of a family dinner you weren't really invited to. The word you use when your husband spends a weekend in a room called sea glass and tells you it was Denver. "I'm tired," I said finally. "Can we just not talk about tonight anymore?" He didn't press. Just nodded and crossed the room to take off his tie. I turned out the bedside lamp, crawled under the covers, and listened to him in the half-light, unbuttoning his cuffs, unlooping leather from wrist. Part of me still wanted him to notice. To say, "There's something I need to tell you." But he didn't. He slid under the covers. His hand reached for mine. I let him hold it, because I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. The sun was already warming the marble tiles when I padded barefoot into the kitchen. I had barely slept. Noah had left early claiming he had calls with Singapore, and I didn't ask questions. That had become our new language. Silences stitched with civility, politeness where intimacy used to be. The coffee maker purred softly, a low hum like breath beneath the quiet. Camille was already at the counter slicing strawberries into a glass bowl, dressed in one of her pastel silk robes that always made her look like she was starring in a perfume ad. She turned when she heard me. "Morning, Abby." Her tone was warm. Too warm. Like nothing had happened last night. Like she hadn't handed me half a dozen tasks while sipping wine or stared through me while their family toasted some cousin's dental practice. I nodded. "Morning." She gestured toward the fresh croissants. "You want one before Mom wakes up and declares them too flaky for her diet?" I almost smiled. Almost. "No thanks," I said, reaching for a mug. She poured herself a glass of something green and viscous. "So, you and Noah seemed quiet last night. Everything okay there?" It was. The question wrapped in silk meant to cut. "We're fine." "Good," she said, taking a sip. "You're good for him. You keep him grounded." I turned to look at her. She wasn't smiling. Not really. Just that practiced curve of her lips that said, "I already know something you don't." Her phone buzzed. She glanced down, then tapped the screen too quickly. But not before I caught a glimpse of the preview. A name. S-Glass Concierge. And a message. "We hope Mr. Harwood enjoyed his stay. Let us know if he'd like to rebook for November." My stomach dropped. She looked up. Saw me looking. Her smile flickered. Just for a second, but it was enough. Something cold and electric passed between us, an understanding neither of us voiced. I set down my coffee. "Actually, I think I'll take one of those croissants after all." She slid the plate toward me. "Of course." And then she turned her back. Went back to her strawberries, as if nothing had happened. But we both knew. We both knew something just had. I told Noah I was staying an extra night at the lake house. Said I needed time to reset, to soak in the silence like those wellness articles always recommended. He didn't question it. He kissed my forehead that morning and left in his pressed charcoal suit, saying he'd see me Thursday night for dinner. A reservation. His treat. But by noon I had packed my bag and slipped out quietly. Didn't tell Camille. Didn't wait for her green smoothie ritual or her passive-aggressive blessings. I just drove. 3 hours of winding roads, eucalyptus shadows flickering across the windshield, and a growing weight in my chest that pulsed like a second heartbeat. When I reached our townhouse in the city, I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the car, engine off, keys in my lap, watching the curtains upstairs flutter. It looked the same. The jasmine plant I'd half-killed still clung to life near the steps. The doormat still said "Welcome home" in cursive, but the air felt different, still, hollow. Like someone had been here and left in a hurry. When I stepped in the house, smelled faintly of cedar and the cologne Noah used to wear when we first met. And something else, vanilla. Noah didn't wear vanilla. The kitchen was spotless. Not a crumb on the counter. Except a single lipstick-stained glass by the sink. Rosé. Faint pink rim. Not mine. I touched it, then pulled my hand back. As if it might bite. Upstairs, I walked past his office. The door was open. His laptop was gone. Not just closed or moved. Gone. I opened the top drawer. Empty. I moved to the bedroom. His suitcase, the sleek black one he reserved for business travel, was in the closet. But the toiletries kit wasn't. It hit me then. Hard. This wasn't business anymore. This wasn't an affair beginning. This was the kind of betrayal that doesn't knock. It lets itself in. Moves things, leaves lip prints on your glasses, and never thinks you'll come back early enough to notice. But I did. And I was no longer looking away. Noah once told me a calendar's just a list of things you're supposed to believe will happen. At the time, I laughed. Now that line sat like a stone in my chest as I scrolled through the shared iCloud calendar we used for over a decade. Monday team strategy call, 2 p.m. Tuesday investor lunch at Haven Bistro, 12:30 p.m. Wednesday client dinner, confirmed, 7 p.m. All of it sounded plausible. Professional, respectable. Except, Haven Bistro had closed 5 months ago. I remembered it clearly because I cried in its bathroom stall after a review meeting went south. Noah brought me a dessert I didn't order and told me the world was still turning. I tapped the calendar event. No invitees, no notes. Just the time slot. I opened another. Same. I pulled up his recent Lyft receipts. Only one matched the location of those calendar entries. The others, mostly blank. Or odd routes that started near our house and ended nowhere. One drop-off was near the marina at a luxury condo development we once looked at before deciding it was too flashy. Another ended near Seaglass Hotel. Seaglass again. It wasn't a coincidence anymore, it was a pattern. I checked our Amex bill. Charges for Seaglass 3 weeks ago. Room service. Champagne. A spa service labeled Bliss Package for two, not one. Not a massage after a long meeting. Not a drink alone at the bar. 2 people, and not me. I stood in the middle of our kitchen holding my phone like it might split in my hands. I wasn't crying. Not yet. Instead, I opened his email. I still knew his password. He hadn't changed it. Too confident. Too distracted, too used to me being the last to notice. I typed slowly. Waited for the inbox to load. Thousands of unread, dozens flagged. But one folder caught my eye. Pending. Inside were travel confirmations. Dinner bookings. A private charter to Napa scheduled for 2 weeks from now under his name plus guest. No name. No initials. But I knew. I knew enough. And worst of all, I knew what I had done. I had looked the other way. I had believed him when he said, "It's just stress," or "Don't make a thing out of nothing." I had told myself he was just tired. That we were just in a slump. But this wasn't a slump, this was a collapse. And I was the last to hear the cracking. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed for almost an hour. Not crying, not speaking, just listening. To what I couldn't say. Maybe the faint hum of the street lamp outside. Maybe the ache in my own chest. Or maybe the silence I had mistaken for peace for too long. Noah always said I overinterpreted stillness. That I was too tuned and too good at hearing what wasn't said. But he never understood silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. Sometimes silence is where betrayal grows its deepest roots. I walked to the dresser and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a small velvet pouch, something I hadn't touched in years. My wedding bracelet. Not the ring. The bracelet. It was his grandmother's. He gave it to me on our wedding day, whispering, "You're family now." For real. I ran my thumb across the worn clasp. For real, I used to believe that. I used to believe a lot of things. That business trips really had back-to-back meetings. That tiredness was why he turned away from me at night. That women's perfume on his jacket was from a hug goodbye. But most of all, I believed the lie I told myself, that I wasn't the kind of woman this happened to. That if I stayed calm, stayed useful, stayed kind, I'd be irreplaceable. And now, as I stood barefoot in a house I once called home, I realized I had made myself invisible so he could forget I was even watching. My phone buzzed. It was Camille. "Hey, just checking in. You okay?" I stared at her message. She had warned me. Months ago. She didn't say it outright, but I heard it in the pauses. In the way her eyes lingered too long when I talked about Noah. In the way she once said, "If something ever felt off, would you tell me? Would you even let yourself know?" I hadn't answered her then. I hadn't known how. But now I was starting to. I typed slowly. "I'm going to the Sea Glass tomorrow. I need to see it for myself." 3 dots. Then her reply. "I'll go with you." No questions. No hesitation. And for the first time in weeks I exhaled. Not because things were better, but because the silence had finally broken. And I was the one who broke it. The sky was gunmetal gray as we pulled into the roundabout in front of Seaglass Hotel. Wind tugged at my scarf. Camille reached over and steadied my hand on the gear shift without saying a word. We didn't speak much on the drive. Just enough to keep the quiet from swallowing us whole. She glanced at me now. "You sure you want to do this?" "No," I said honestly. Then added, "But I need to." The valet opened the car door and I stepped out into the cold, salt-heavy air. Seaglass was as beautiful as I remembered: modern angles, softened by natural stone, endless glass panels reflecting the sea just beyond. A place meant for celebrations. Escapes, lies. The lobby was quiet for a Saturday morning. I walked past the fireplace and toward the concierge desk like I belonged there. My fingers gripped the handle of my tote bag tighter. Inside was a folded reservation printout I'd intercepted from Noah's inbox. A weekend getaway for 2. Room 412. I stopped beside a table of complimentary fruit water and tried to steady my breath. Camille stood just behind me, watching my back like a shield. "I'm not going to cause a scene," I said quietly. "I know," she replied. "But if one happens, I've got breath mints and bail money." That made me smile, even if just a little. A bell dinged. The elevator doors opened behind us, soft like a whisper. And out walked the woman I had seen only in hints. Taupe trench coat, hair swept into a twist, not flashy, not fake. Just composed. She didn't see me at first. She handed her keycard to the front desk, laughing softly at something the concierge said. Then she turned. And our eyes met. Not for a long time. Just a flicker. Just long enough. Her smile faltered. Not dropped, just froze. For half a second. She knew. I knew. Camille put a hand gently on my back. Now what? I exhaled through my nose. "Now we go upstairs." We waited 5 minutes before going upstairs. Enough time for her to disappear. Enough time for me to decide I wouldn't. The elevator was slow, like it sensed the weight I carried. Camille stood beside me, silent. She didn't try to comfort me. She knew this wasn't the kind of ache that needed soft words. Floor 4. The doors slid open with a sound too gentle for what I was about to face. Room 412. I knew the number before we even turned the corner. Noah had used our joint email to confirm the booking. He probably thought I'd never check. But I had. And now I was here, standing in front of a door he opened for someone else. I raised my hand, paused, then knocked. No answer. Another knock, louder this time. Still nothing. I turned to Camille. "Give me 30 seconds. She nodded, stepping back toward the elevator, watching the hallway. I took out the hotel envelope I'd printed the confirmation into and walked down to the front desk. I left something in my room, I told the receptionist with a calm I didn't feel. Room 412. Under the name Noah Greenfield, she checked her computer. Yes, that's still active. I'll have someone escort you, I won't be long. Just a sweater, I said with a rehearsed smile. She handed me a keycard. The walk back to the room felt like walking into a memory I didn't own. I slid the card in. The light blinked green. The door opened with a soft click. And I stepped into the world Noah built without me. It wasn't grand, but it was curated. Deliberate. Champagne in the silver bucket. 2 glasses, one with a faint lipstick rim. Her lipstick. A cashmere scarf draped over the chair, his favorite cologne still lingering in the air. My breath caught in my throat. There was music playing faintly from the bathroom speaker. Jazz. He told me once jazz bored him. Apparently it doesn't anymore. I walked to the bed. The sheets were rumpled, tucked back. Used. Beside the lamp sat a card folded shut. I knew his handwriting before I opened it. You make me feel like I never lived before. I didn't know I could want this much. I didn't know I could start over. No name. Just his signature. The man who once told me I was his only constant. The man who now promised someone else a beginning. Behind me the door creaked softly. I turned. She stood there, trench coat open, keys in hand, not shocked. Not apologetic. Just tired. You're not supposed to be here, she said. No, I answered. Neither were you. She closed the door behind her. And for the first time we were in the same room. No lies between us. No Noah to translate, only truth and silence. She leaned against the closed door, arms crossed, not in defiance but in protection. I stayed near the bed. Neither of us moved closer. This wasn't how I wanted to find out, I said. She let out a quiet breath. I didn't want to be found. I studied her. She wasn't some caricature of a mistress. No heavy makeup, no perfume trail. She looked like a woman who had believed she was chosen. How long, I asked. She glanced at the nightstand. It doesn't matter now. It does to me. There was a pause. Then she said quietly, 1 year and 2 months. I blinked. Not just after our last anniversary, but before our daughter's broken arm. Before our beach trip. Before the night he cried in our kitchen and said he was just tired of everything. All lies. All within that same year. She looked at me. I didn't know about you at first. Not really, I tilted my head. But then you did. Her eyes flicked down. Yes. And you stayed. She didn't argue. Didn't apologize. I thought he was leaving you, she said. He said he was filing, that he had to wait until I held up a hand. Don't. I'm not blaming you. Her brow furrowed. Then what do you want? I walked over to the window. Pulled the curtain back. Watched the ocean roll against the rocks. I don't know, I admitted. Not an apology, not a fight, maybe just a name. She hesitated. Sabrina. Sabrina, I repeated. A beautiful name. Clean. Elegant. Just like her. How did you meet? I asked. She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. At a leadership summit, I gave a talk on crisis PR. He sat in the front row and asked questions he already knew the answers to. I swallowed. That sounded like him. He made me feel seen, she said, almost like she was confessing to herself. As if my thoughts had weight. As if I wasn't just filling space. I turned to her. So did he once. The silence stretched between us. Thick but not cruel. More like fog than smoke. He's not here, I said. No, she answered. He went to get wine. I nodded. You'll tell him I was here, she looked unsure. Do you want me to? I want you to decide. That startled her. Not the answer, but the lack of rage. Why are you really here? She asked. I walked to the door. To see the woman he thought was worth risking everything for. She took a step toward me. And I opened the door. Turned back. You're not the question, I said. He is. She didn't respond. I stepped into the hallway. Camille was waiting at the elevator holding 2 small coffees and a paper bag. "You okay?" she asked. I looked at her, then back at the closed door behind me. "No," I said. But I didn't need to be. Not yet. 3 days after the hotel, I watched Noah on stage. Yes, I went. Not to support him. Not to interrupt. I went to listen. To see how much of our life he would keep. And how much he'd polish into fiction. The local health conference was held at the downtown Marriott. Glass chandeliers, white table linens. The kind of space where everyone laughs too loud and shakes hands too firmly. He was introduced as Dr. Noah Whitaker, visionary leader in mental wellness advocacy. I sat in the back row behind a ficus plant. Camille offered to come, but I needed to be alone for this. He walked onto the stage with the ease of someone used to applause. Hair trimmed, jacket tailored. Wearing that soft smile he practiced in the mirror before every patient consult. "I want to begin," he said, "with a personal story." Of course. Noah always began with a story. Because he knew how to frame it. A few years ago, he said, I nearly lost myself. Burnout, isolation, the creeping suspicion that I was failing not just at work but as a man. Murmurs of understanding rippled through the crowd. He paused, let it settle. "I made choices," he said, "that hurt the people closest to me. No names, no details. Just enough confession to sound noble. But through reflection and therapy, I found the courage to own my flaws." Applause. I stared at his polished shoes, the way he stood squarely in the light. "I rebuilt my life," he said with honesty. With humility. And with someone who saw the real me. Sabrina. Of course. He didn't say her name, but he didn't have to. People love a redemption arc. Even when it's built on half-truths. I didn't wait for the applause to fade. As soon as he said someone who saw the real me, I stood up. Quietly. Calmly, no heads turned. Because the kind of silence I was carrying didn't need noise. Outside, the sun hit the pavement hard. It was one of those cold, bright afternoons where the light feels harsh, like it's trying too hard to warm you. I walked 3 blocks. Past the coffee shop where Noah once met me every Friday after work. Past the gallery where we bought that hideous, abstract piece he swore would appreciate in value. And then I turned left into a building I'd walked by for years but never entered. Frost and Calder LLP. Divorce and Family Law. The receptionist looked up, eyes soft behind rimless glasses. "May I help you?" "Yes," I said. "I'd like to speak to someone about dissolving a marriage." "Mine." She nodded like she'd heard that sentence 1,000 times. Maybe she had. "Do you have an appointment?" I opened my coat. "Number. But I have time." She gestured to a chair. "We'll find someone." I waited 12 minutes. Watched the way sunlight filtered through the blinds and landed on a pot of tired succulents. When a door opened, a woman stepped out, mid-40s. Simple navy dress, sharp eyes but kind. "I'm Ellen Calder," she said, extending a hand. "Let's talk." Her office smelled like lemon furniture polish and steel confidence. Not a speck out of place. We sat. She didn't rush me. Didn't push me to list every betrayal. Instead, she asked, "What do you want?" Not what did he do, not how angry are you. Just that. What do you want? And for the first time in a long time, I answered clearly. "I want my name back," I said. She nodded. "I want to close the bank account he doesn't know I still have," I continued. "I want the condo in my name returned to me. I want to revise my healthcare proxy. I want his face out of my emergency contacts." I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I just listed. One by one the things I had left that were mine. When I finished, Ellen said, "You're already ahead of most." I looked at her. "I don't want revenge." "You want clarity," she said. "Yes." She opened a drawer, pulled out a slim folder. "We can begin with a separation agreement. It'll buy you time to move cleanly." I signed the retainer. My signature looked steadier than I expected. As if my hand had been waiting for this moment longer than my mind had caught up. She stood. When you're ready for the next step, just call. I nodded. I will. But I already knew the next step wasn't just legal, it was personal and quiet and permanent. Noah came home 2 days later. Suit bag slung over his shoulder, award plaque tucked under his arm. I wasn't there. Of course not. The condo was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels carved intentional. He walked past the foyer table where we used to leave keys. There was only his now. He called my name once. Then again. The bedroom was still made. But the top drawer of the dresser was empty. No shoes by the door. No hairbrush on the sink. Only one thing waited for him. An envelope. Plain, cream-colored. Centered on the dining table we bought on a road trip to Vermont back when we still finished each other's sentences. He opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Not a letter. Not a confession. Just one sentence typed in a font he once helped me pick out for a Christmas card. You don't get to write my ending. That was it. No signature, no date. No return. Just that. I imagine he stood there for a while. Maybe reread it. Maybe felt his face grow hot for the first time in a long time. Because in every version of our story, he told he was still the narrator. The man who healed, who moved on, who turned pain into purpose. But I had rewritten the final chapter, and this time he wasn't in it. He tried calling me the next day, once. Then 5 times more. I didn't block him, I just didn't answer. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because the only thing more powerful than a scream is a silence you choose. A month later, I heard through a colleague that he'd given another talk. This one didn't mention a woman who saw the real him. Maybe because she saw enough to leave too. Or maybe because he realized the story he kept telling wasn't true anymore. At least not to anyone who mattered. No one in this neighborhood knew I used to be married to a famous doctor. Even fewer knew I walked away from it all. No courtroom battles, no headlines, just one note left on a marble countertop. I rented a small 3rd-floor apartment on a quiet tree-lined street in the outskirts of Durham. It didn't have an elevator. The floors creaked. The air smelled like pine needles and old brick. But it had morning light. It had silence that wasn't empty. And it had space for me. The key in my hand was the first I'd had made for myself in over a decade. It was cold. Sharp-edged. Honest. I turned it in the lock slowly like a ceremony. I chose everything. The gray linen curtains soft but not fragile. The secondhand kitchen table worn in all the right places. A low bookshelf I built myself where unread books waited patiently. Nothing matched. Nothing reminded me of him. And that was the point. On my first morning, I opened the window. Not for anyone else. Not to let in the past. Just to feel the breeze move through something I now called mine. From outside came the chime of wind bells from a neighbor's porch. The crunch of bicycle tires on gravel. The faint bark of a dog chasing squirrels. A child's giggle echoing between buildings. None of them knew that I had once sat in a hospital supply closet shaking, reading a text message that shattered 10 years of pretending. That was fine. I didn't speak to anyone that first week. Not out of fear, but because for the first time I needed to hear myself again. One night I made tea. Not because someone else asked. Not because I had to fill a silence. Just because I liked the sound of the kettle, the ritual of it. I sat on the hardwood floor back against the wall, mug cradled between both hands. No television, no notifications, no obligation to smile. And I realized this apartment was small. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel small inside it. There were things I used to do not because I loved them, but because he did. Because he noticed. Or praised. Or worse, expected. Now I was learning what they felt like without an audience. I started making Sunday pancakes again. But this time not for a man who counted calories and never finished a plate. Just for me. I stood barefoot in my tiny kitchen whisking batter by hand. A blue speckled bowl from the thrift store. A pan that stuck sometimes, but I didn't mind. The first pancake burned. The second was lopsided. The third was perfect. I ate them all. I took my coffee out to the balcony afterward. There was no view. Just a glimpse of cracked asphalt and ivy crawling up a utility pole. But the sun hit my cheek like something personal. Later that week, I pulled out my old sewing machine. It had been gathering dust in a box since before the wedding. He once called it clutter, so I stopped mentioning it. Now it sat proudly by the window. I started small, a linen pouch, then a pillowcase, then a slipcover for the chair I'd rescued from the curb. Each stitch felt like a conversation with someone I used to be. One evening a knock came at the door. A hesitant rhythm. Not urgent. I opened it to find the teenage girl from the apartment across the hall, curly hair, oversized hoodie, holding something wrapped in tinfoil. Hi. My grandma says to give you this. Said she saw you moving in and she bakes too much. I took the bundle still warm and smiled. Tell her thank you. What's her name? Elaine. I'm Tasha. Hi Tasha, I'm Abigail. She nodded, eyes scanning the apartment behind me. It smells like pancakes. I laughed, and it wasn't a bitter sound. Tasha's voice softened. You live alone? Yes. That's cool. She turned and left before I could say more. But something stayed behind in that moment. Recognition. Not of me as someone's wife, but as someone knew someone here. That night I placed the foil-wrapped slice of banana bread on a plate and ate it slowly. Not because I owed anyone gratitude, but because it was kind and soft and tasted like a beginning. I once wrote a letter I never sent. It was months before I left. Late at night. On hotel stationery I had slipped into my purse. He was asleep beside me, breathing like nothing was wrong. The letter began. You make me feel invisible even when I'm screaming. I folded it neatly, tucked it into my wallet behind my license. Carried it across state lines, across arguments, across silences too loud to explain. I never gave it to him. Not because I changed my mind, but because I knew he'd read it like a deposition, not a confession. He would argue tone, word choice, timeline, blame. And what I wanted wasn't to be right. It was to be free. Weeks after I settled into the apartment, I found that letter again. Creased. Softened at the edges. Unread by anyone but me. I lit a match over the sink. Watched the flame curl around the ink. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like release. Later that evening, I wrote another letter. This one I did send, but not to him. I wrote to Elaine, the grandmother across the hall. Just a note folded once slipped under her door. Dear Elaine, thank you for the banana bread. I've just moved here, and I didn't expect kindness to find me this fast. Your gift meant more than you know. Abigail. The next morning a reply waited on my doormat. Dear Abigail, we don't need a reason to be kind, but I'm glad it found you when you needed it. Welcome home. I sat with that paper in my hands longer than I should have, not because of what it said, but because it was the first time the word home had felt like it might belong to me again. There was no moment where everything came together. No grand applause, no cinematic fade to black, just a Tuesday morning. I woke up before the alarm. The sun spilled through the blinds, catching the dust in the air like it was glitter. I sat up slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wasn't rushing toward or away from anything. I made tea instead of coffee. Listened to a podcast I liked instead of the news he used to play too loud. Opened my laptop and edited a resume I hadn't touched in years. There was a job opening at a local nonprofit that worked with displaced women. I didn't know if they'd hire me, but I wanted to try. Around noon, I went for a walk. Past the bookstore with the crooked sign. The bakery with the window seat no one ever sat in. The corner thrift shop where I once bought a silk scarf for $3 and never wore it. And then I passed someone who looked just like him. Same walk, same hair, same careless confidence. For a flicker of a moment, something inside me pulled tight, then relaxed. Because it wasn't him. And even if it had been, I wouldn't have looked away. That night, I called my sister for the first time in over a year. She didn't ask what happened. She just said, I'm glad you called. I ate leftovers from 2 days ago, wore socks that didn't match. Read 3 pages of a book I kept pretending I'd finish. And when I turned out the lights, there was no voice in my head telling me I should have done more, been more, said less. There was just quiet, the good kind. And that was it. No headlines, no confetti. Just a woman alone in her apartment, no longer disappearing inside someone else's story. That was the ending. Not loud, not bitter, just free. And sometimes that's the loudest kind of win there is. Some endings come quietly, no doors slammed, no voices raised. Just a woman sipping tea in her own kitchen, learning that peace doesn't need permission. Sometimes we stay too long in places where we no longer belong because we mistake comfort for love. But healing begins the moment we stop explaining our pain and start honoring our own voice. In this life, choosing quiet joy over loud approval might just be the bravest thing we do. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear, have you ever chosen peace over being right?